Number two is to, as leaders, to normalize the struggle. This was one of the conversations that came up yesterday in the mental health segment. We have a responsibility, as leaders, oftentimes, again, we think we've been conditioned to believe a part of our responsibility is to instill trust and confidence in us from our people, not only about our capabilities and capacity, but also the future of the business. And so it's that mindset of never let them see you sweat. You got to show up. But we want to find the balance between being able to have authenticity and transparency over what we're really going through, while simultaneously still establishing confidence in our people and our ability to lead them forward, right? We don't want to turn into an absolute mess where people are like, I know they're going through a lot and I actually don't trust that they have the ability to lead us out of this. It is a fine, nuanced line as leaders, but I believe you can do both. And what's interesting in the research, there was a great research study conducted in Western Europe right before the pandemic, asking employees what they thought their manager's responsibility was. And universally, the response that came back was, my manager's responsibility is to not only care about my professional performance, but my personal well-being. My manager's responsibility is to care about me as a human being. And knowing just from all of my conversations in the recent months leading up to this event with spa professionals, I know that as of any industry, this is a group of people that are naturally empathetic and in tuned to other human beings. Number one, they want to be cared for as a human being, and number two, they want opportunities to be able to grow and expand in the next highest iteration of themselves. And you can do that by doing two things, and that normalizing the struggle, acknowledging and having transparency and humility and authenticity around what you've really gone through. But the power is when you can share the struggle while simultaneously following that up with, but here's what I'm doing to get through it. This morning when I woke up, I had a moment where I didn't want to pop up, but I fell back on my routines, the little rituals that I do that I know always shift my state, because I know from the neuroscience that the fastest way to shift from that fear is to slip into flow, focus, and I do these two things. That's leadership. Acknowledging the pain, but having a plan for how you overcome those challenges. And the third one I'll give you in this idea, strategy number one, how do we strengthen ourselves collectively as an industry? And what's interesting to me, because we are industry agnostic, my firm, I see industry leadership, how people are responding to this moment in time. So I feel when collectively leadership representing an entire industry subscribe to resilient behaviors and mindsets, competencies that shift an entire industry, there will be industries, mark my words, that come back faster, not just because they're well positioned from an economic standpoint, but because their leadership across the board was more prepared to meet this moment. Right? And this was one of the strategies. So we've got naming the emotions, normalizing the struggle, and number three is reframing the story. And this one is so critically important, and I please take notes on this one. Write these three down, but this one in particular, reframing the story. So when we were 30 days into the pandemic, my wife and I were based here in Los Angeles, my studio here, we're in LA, and I was quite nervous about just what lockdown meant. And the grocery store shelves were empty, and I felt uneasy about the situation. And we have dear friends that live on the Oregon-Washington coast, and they have like 20 acres, and I'm just like, let's go up there and let's just sort of be in lockdown with them together up there. And we went up there and we're together for 2-3 weeks, and I'm in the battle of watching my business completely explode. Contract after contract cancel. And I am feeling like, and the story I'm telling myself in the moment is that COVID is the worst thing that has ever happened to my business. And this is the talk track. This is the worst thing. This is the most disruptive, destructive thing that's ever happened to my business. It's the most painful thing I've ever gone through personally. And the people we were staying with is a very, very successful mentor to me. Built many companies, and I'll never forget, we're standing in the kitchen, I'm having coffee and I'm lamenting, and he grabs me and he looks me in the eye, and we should all be so lucky to have people in our life that will say things like this to us. He said, Seth, what if COVID wasn't the worst thing that ever happened to your business? What if COVID was the greatest thing that ever happened to your business? Now, of course, in that moment, my immediate knee-jerk reaction was, are you freaking crazy, man? How are you gonna tell me this is the greatest thing that ever happened in my business? We're gonna let go of staff. We're gonna have to sell our house. Like, I don't know how long this is gonna go. And he's like, just allow yourself to consider the possibility. What if it was the greatest thing that ever happened to your business? And I sat with that for about 24 hours. And as I slowly started to open my aperture to that possibility of like, what would it mean if it was the greatest thing? Of course, acknowledging the pain and the loss that people have suffered. I lost my father-in-law to COVID. I'm not downplaying at all the seriousness of this pandemic, but even with that loss, personal loss, I get to decide the story I'm gonna tell myself about what this year has meant. And the second I did, everything changed for me. I started to act from a place of, what does this mean in terms of how I reinvent? What are the things that I wanted to do that I couldn't do before? When we were busy the year before and I was on the road 150 nights a year with events in the physical space, and I saw my wife a quarter of the year, all of a sudden this opportunity, what if we could do this work and I could be with my family at the same time? What if I could figure out how to create meaningful experiences through this digital divide, use new technologies? This studio didn't exist a year ago. I didn't know how to do this. And I just had to reinvent and lean into the possibility of allowing myself to experiment, learn, grow, fail, try, but not let myself tell the talk track that this would not be as impactful, that there is no way I could replicate the impact that I had in the real world, that I could be as successful. Why? Baloney. Maybe I could make it better. What's the story you've been telling yourself about the past year? What's the story your employees are telling themselves about the past year? If we reframed that story, what might it look like? What's the story you're telling the team?